My name is Clara, and 6 months ago, I landed what I thought was my dream job. I was hired as a senior designer at a firm known for its edgy campaigns and bold visuals. They said they wanted fresh energy, and I believed them. I had spent the weekend fine-tuning my case studies, prepping my talking points, and reviewing metrics. I walked into that performance review expecting feedback, maybe a few things to improve, but mostly a conversation about growth. Instead, I sat across from Brian, my boss, as he skimmed through a stack of printed papers with a rehearsed look of concern. "Your creative output has been inconsistent," he said, without looking at me. "Clients have noted a lack of cohesion in your concepts, and your timelines are problematic." I blinked, trying to stay calm, but my heart had already begun to race. It wasn't just what he was saying. It was how casually he delivered it, as if my entire contribution could be summed up as disappointing. I knew the numbers. I had led 3 major campaigns in the past quarter. One of them had tripled the client's engagement within 2 weeks. Another had been praised directly by the CEO. But none of that was in the papers he held. I tried to speak, but he raised his hand to stop me. "Let me finish," he said, flipping to another page. The room felt too quiet, too sterile, the glass walls almost mocking in their transparency as people passed by, glancing in. My palms were damp. I kept nodding like a robot, my jaw clenched. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something told me to look. I pulled it out discreetly and glanced at the screen. The number wasn't saved. Just a single message: "Don't react, he's recording you." I froze. Brian was still speaking, but I couldn't hear him. My ears were ringing. I slowly raised my eyes to him. He was watching me, waiting for a reaction. I smiled weakly and slipped the phone back into my pocket. His phone, the one he normally kept on the table, wasn't there. That struck me as odd. He was always tethered to it. Instead, I noticed the way his jacket bulged ever so slightly at the side. He leaned forward again, continuing with his scripted evaluation. "Your collaboration with the team has raised some concerns," he said. "There's been feedback that you tend to dominate discussions, and that can stifle other voices." I swallowed hard. This wasn't just a bad review, it was a trap. "Would you like to comment on your working relationships, Clara?" he asked, voice perfectly neutral. I nodded slowly. "I value the team," I said, keeping my tone as steady as I could. "Everyone brings different strengths." He smiled politely, but his eyes narrowed. I couldn't stop thinking about the message. Recording me. Why, for what purpose, and who had warned me? I glanced around the room, looking for anything out of place. That's when I saw it. On the shelf behind him, tucked in the fake plant, something small and black blinked red. I had to squint to be sure. A tiny recording device nearly hidden among the plastic leaves. My throat tightened. I forced myself to stay still. No flinching, no staring, just breathing. He slid a new document toward me, a printed performance improvement plan. His tone softened, almost kindly. "I need you to sign this before the end of the meeting." "Acknowledgement of the discussion," he said. I looked at the paper. Bullet points filled with distortions, twisted summaries of my work allegations without evidence. A neat little script for pushing someone out without leaving a mess. My fingers hovered over the pen. My brain screamed. Something was very, very wrong. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. When I first joined the team, I was all in. I stayed late, asked questions, and volunteered for every brainstorming session. I believed I had landed in a place that valued fresh perspective and bold creativity. In the first month, I pitched a campaign for a nonprofit focused on clean water. I built it around interactive storytelling and community-generated visuals. The room lit up when I presented it. Brian, my manager, nodded slowly, then said it lacked polish. He asked if someone from the branding team could take a pass at it. A week later, I watched that same concept barely altered presented by someone else as part of a client deck. I told myself it didn't matter who delivered the message as long as it got out. But when the campaign launched and Brian credited the work to the branding team in an all-hands email, something cracked a little inside me. I couldn't unfeel the sting of being erased. Then came the tech startup launch. I had spent nights refining the user journey and pushing the visual identity into something sleek but human. Brian said it was over-designed and needed to be simplified. He reassigned it entirely to Marcus, saying I should observe how more experienced designers executed. 2 weeks later, my original framework was live, right down to the call to action language. But now it had Brian's name on the proposal. I never heard him explain the pivot. I just saw the results approved and praised while I sat quietly at my desk. This happened more than once. I'd pour myself into the research fight through creative blocks and refine my pitch only to watch it vanish from my hands. And every time it resurfaced, it wore someone else's name. At first, I wondered if I was being too sensitive. Maybe that was just how the game worked. But each project left me more cautious, more reluctant to share too much too soon. The red flags weren't obvious at first. They came disguised as feedback, as mentorship, as team dynamics. I kept telling myself to be a team player, to grow thicker skin. But deep down, I knew something was off. The work was mine. The voice was mine. And still, somehow I was becoming invisible. It took me a while to notice the patterns in other people. I was too focused on surviving my own confusion to see what was happening around me. But once I started paying attention, the signs were everywhere. Olivia used to light up meetings. Her ideas were sharp-layered and came with an instinctive understanding of what a brand needed. Lately, she barely spoke unless prompted. I caught her one afternoon lingering in the hallway outside the conference room. She looked like she wanted to say something but changed her mind. Later that week, I saw Brian pitch a client campaign that was almost identical to the one Olivia had presented and been told to scrap a month earlier. Then there was Marcus. He once showed me a prototype for a client website that was sleek and intuitive. Brian called it messy, told him to rethink the layout. But at the next internal review, Brian walked us through a framework that was clearly based on that prototype. I started feeling nauseous in meetings. Watching people nod along to stolen work was like being trapped in a gaslit loop. I wasn't crazy. I just wasn't supposed to notice. It all snapped into focus the morning I got the email. It came from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "I believe you." Inside was a message and a PDF attachment. The sender was Jenna, a former executive assistant, who had left abruptly a year ago. She wrote that she had seen this pattern before. Brian had a history of taking credit, isolating talent, and turning teams into competitive silos. The PDF listed 5 former employees' dates of exit and notes Jenna had kept during her time at the company. Each name came with short summaries. A strategy director whose performance review didn't match her successful campaign metrics. A lead designer was told he lacked leadership potential while mentoring 2 junior staff members. All of it is familiar. All of it was eerily close to what I was going through. I sat there staring at the screen pulse thudding in my ears. This wasn't just about me. This was systemic. And if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in keeping it that way. Once I understood the pattern, I couldn't sit in silence anymore. I needed proof, not just memories and gut feelings. So I started documenting everything. Every project file I touched, I saved a copy to my personal drive, time-stamped and organized. Emails that praised my work, but were followed by meetings where Brian dismissed it publicly, went into a separate folder. I kept screenshots, drafts, and even internal chat messages that showed the progression of my ideas. I didn't just want to confront him. I wanted to be ready if I ever had to defend myself. At first, it felt paranoid, but the more I uncovered, the more necessary it became. When meetings were scheduled, I made sure there were calendar invites that showed attendees and topics. If I contributed something in a brainstorming session, I followed up with recap emails summarizing who said what. I kept it polite, but precise. One afternoon, Olivia stopped by my desk with a question about formatting. She glanced at my screen and saw one of my folders open. Her eyes lingered. I thought she might ask about it, but she didn't. A few hours later, she sent me a Slack message, just 5 words. "You're not imagining any of this." We met after work in the park, away from phones and office walls. She told me about the Clarion pitch, the way Brian used her original proposal, but told executives it was his. She'd spent 2 years believing maybe she wasn't as good as she once thought. Her voice broke when she said that. I wasn't alone anymore. That changed everything. We started quietly pulling in others. Marcus joined us after Olivia showed him an old mock-up he'd made that had been mysteriously reimagined by Brian. He didn't say much, just nodded, and said it made sense now. Then I got another email from Jenna. She asked if I could meet her. We chose a cafe across town, both nervous that it was too close. She brought a manila envelope thick with notes, including HR records, project comparisons, and internal memos she'd copied before leaving. Inside was a document I hadn't expected, a printout of Brian's calendar from her time as his assistant. Several meetings labeled simply check-in or recap were marked at the same time. Feedback about staff suddenly shifted. She pointed to one. That was when Olivia's promotion was paused, she said. He met with a board member the same afternoon. I didn't realize it until later, but I started writing everything down. Holding that envelope felt like holding a fuse. We were building something, quietly, carefully. If Brian found out too early, he'd crush it. But if we waited too long, someone else would fall under him. This wasn't just about one stolen idea or one ruined career. It was about all of them. And for the first time, I started thinking not just about defense. I started thinking about exposure. The room buzzed with anticipation. Industry leaders, senior executives, and even press photographers lingered near the stage. It was the biggest annual showcase of the year, and Brian had positioned himself as the visionary behind our team's success. We stood near the back, our group quiet but solid. Olivia squeezed my hand. Marcus adjusted his cuff, eyes locked forward. I had the flash drive in my pocket already synced to the main deck cued on the screen. Brian took the stage with perfect composure. His smile was confident, his tone smooth, as he welcomed everyone and spoke about innovation, resilience, and creative synergy. He clicked the remote to bring up the first slide, but it wasn't the one he expected. The screen flickered, then played a video. At first, no one understood what they were watching. Then Brian's own voice filled the room. He was seated in his office speaking casually to someone off camera. Keep them chasing validation, and they'll give you everything. Just don't let them compare notes. The silence snapped. A murmur rippled across the crowd. He tried to click forward, but the video kept playing. A clip of him dismissing Olivia's work in a meeting, followed by an internal clip of him presenting that same design to the executive board as his own concept. Brian froze. Someone in the front row stood up. The head of strategy turned to whisper to the CEO. I could feel the air shift around us like a storm was gathering in slow motion. Security moved toward the tech booth, but we'd already planned for that. Marcus had sent the video through the official presentation link earlier that morning, flagged as a last-minute visual addition. The file was embedded. More clips follow, with him praising Marcus's prototype in a private call after rejecting it in front of the team. Him coaching someone to write a negative peer review. He mocked my voice during a rehearsal. I stepped forward as he began shouting over the footage. Unauthorized. Tampered. Fabricated. But people weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at me. I walked up the side aisle, calm but deliberate. Olivia, Jenna, Marcus, and the others followed behind me. The screen paused as I reached the podium. I tapped the next slide. A gallery of our work appeared this time, labeled clearly with the true creators beneath each image. I said we didn't do this for revenge. We did it for the Ruth. For every idea stolen. For every designer made to feel small. I looked toward the executives. You trusted a single voice. Now you've heard others. No one clapped. No one spoke. Not yet. But I saw it in their faces. Shock, yes. But also recognition. Understanding. The spell had broken. And for the first time in months, I felt the room turn toward us, not away. The day after the showcase, we were called into the executive conference room. No one said much as we filed in, still unsure if what we'd done would be seen as defiance or courage. The atmosphere was formal but not cold. The CEO, Valerie, sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Beside her were the heads of HR and legal. We braced ourselves for whatever came next. Valerie began by acknowledging what had happened. She didn't defend Brian or try to soften the reality. Instead, she admitted failure. Not just his, but hers too, for allowing a culture to grow where so many voices had been silenced. She announced that Brian had been terminated effective immediately. His access was revoked, and his office was cleared by the end of the day. There was no ceremony to it, just a firm closing of a chapter. But what surprised me most was what came next. Valerie said we wouldn't be punished, that instead we'd be part of something new, a complete restructuring of our team built on fairness, clarity, and shared ownership. Olivia was offered the director role. Marcus would lead the strategy for collaborative frameworks, and I was asked to take on something different. A new position that didn't exist before, ethics and creative integrity. That was the title. My job would be to develop systems to protect attribution, improve feedback culture, and ensure no one could rise by stepping on others again. I felt a lump in my throat as I read the job description. This wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility, a chance to build the kind of workplace I had once believed this place already was. I said yes. After the meeting, we didn't celebrate. Not exactly. But there was a sense of peace, of something uncoiling inside all of us that had been wound too tight for too long. In the weeks that followed, people walked a little taller. Olivia led team sessions with openness and patience. Marcus invited junior staff to planning calls. Feedback flowed both ways, and the work somehow got better. Justice didn't come with fanfare. It came with steady hands, quiet conversations, and a long overdue shift in trust. What we exposed had been ugly, but what came after had the chance to be honest. And that made it worth everything. In the months after everything shifted, I watched something unexpected take root. The team didn't just recover, they flourished in ways I hadn't imagined possible. People who had once shrunk into silence now offered ideas freely. Olivia's meetings turned into roundtables of shared ownership. Marcus mentored new hires with the kind of care that made people stay late just to learn. Then something truly surprising happened. We started getting emails from former teammates. A few asked if they could come back. One message came from Mia, who had left 2 years ago after her concept was stripped from a major campaign. She said she'd seen what we did at the showcase. She called it brave. I didn't feel brave reading it, just deeply relieved. The energy in the office was different now. We worked hard, but the fear was gone. No one had to armor up before a team review. Every name was credited. Every deck was transparent. And the little victories piled up until they no longer felt little. One evening, as I was finishing up in the quiet office, I opened my inbox and found a message from someone I didn't know. They worked in another firm in another city. But they had seen the video of our showcase presentation passed along quietly through a designer's group chat. They told me their manager had been doing something similar, that they'd thought about quitting until they watched us stand up and speak. They were now gathering their own documentation, having conversations they'd been too scared to start. They ended the note with one sentence. "You showed me that speaking up doesn't have to end a career, it can save it." I sat back in my chair and let those words settle in. We hadn't planned a movement. We hadn't asked to become an example. But somehow, by simply refusing to stay small, we gave someone else the permission to rise. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration, of credit, of confidence, of worth. And in that moment, I realized that the most powerful change doesn't come from tearing something down. It comes from building something better together where no one has to fight just to be seen.